Welcome to Reddit Giraffe. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a shit show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides: abusive father, neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much, and she basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, are also abusive, and just a real friggin' sheep of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to my stepmom. So the wedding was doomed to be terrible. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She'd reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way, outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and literally collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he is going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset, and the day continues but she's visibly upset. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mom was that she not drink. She was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into a reception dress, her mom goes table to table pounding down all of the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting chug, 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 and stepmom walks back to her mom downing the last one and denying everything. Cousin slips out the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car, and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that is happening, Grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of shit, including marrying a kid. Stepmom was 25 at this point, who she hates, not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and owing her a bunch of money. Dad tells her to frig off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying or of lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried to not cry and also remain visible to my dad for the next several hours. They may have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. I work at a golf course with a lot of history behind it. We do wedding venues inside the clubhouse and the actual ceremony is held outside by the historic water fountain and large pond. First problem was the weather. I live in the high desert and it was very warm. A solid 90 degrees that day, and it was also pretty windy. So everyone's outside, no umbrellas, no SUPs. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts. Drive around a little bit on the golf course. To be fair, it is beautiful on the course during sunset. However, the cart had somehow gotten a nail in the tire went flat, battery on the cart went crazy and the cart ended up freaking out. It came to a complete stop from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanisms locked up, almost seizing. Both the bride and groom, fairly overweight mind you, both fell out and rolled over a few times. They were totally okay, just a few bruises and perhaps a bruised ego or two. So retrieving that cart was fun. And last but not least, the power inside the clubhouse went out due to the high winds. There was no after party available. Only the cake was cut, hardly any food was given out. Yeah, not a great day to cover for someone on your day off. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me, so much sugar everywhere, basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had left. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the mariage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. I was not born yet, but my parents rented the observation deck on the Hancock Building in Boston for the reception. Tallest building in the city, beautiful view. My dad pored over historic weather charts to figure out what day was statistically most likely to be nice out. Day of the wedding comes in, of course, thick fog unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Couldn't see a thing out the windows of the room they had picked specifically for the view. Worked out well though, they were happily married for nearly 30 years before cancer took my dad's life a few years ago. There's one other funny anecdote from that wedding. The wedding was held in King's Chapel, which is an incredibly historic church here in downtown Boston that's somewhat of a major tourist attraction. To close that on a weekend afternoon for a wedding, it turns out, was not very expensive. The tourists waiting outside to see the church didn't know that, though, and someone started the rumor that my parents were incredibly wealthy, maybe even Kennedys. As a result, there were tons of people taking photos of them when they left the ceremony. Not sure if any of them ever figured out that my parents were most certainly not rich or famous. I played a wedding where as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was because nobody liked us, but the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families and everyone basically went home upset, injured or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job, and the only person watching was the drunk uncle dancing on his own asking for requests we didn't know.